I want to say balls to the wall, but not like not say that.
Why not?
Just go completely
Ovaries
ham on
to the ceiling. I don't know.
Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I am TFD's creative director, Holly Trantham. You've probably seen me somewhere on the channel here. I also host our book club for our society members and do a lot of our member workshops. And I'm so happy to be joining you for this new series. We're going to be diving into real people's budgets, taking a look at where they're spending, where they're saving, where they're not saving, what they could be doing better, and offering our best advice. And joining me to dissect these budgets is financial educator and author of Money Out Loud, Berna Anat. Hello, Berna.
Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super psyched. Like getting into people's budgets in like an incredibly nosy way, but in the spirit of like education is just my favorite thing. So this is an honor, a privilege, and like a little bit of a dream to just be this nosy.
Yeah, well, I'm so excited you're here. Can you tell us a little bit about your background with budget coaching? I know you've done a lot of coaching in your professional life as a financial educator and just like your general budget philosophy.
Yes, of course. So I am a financial hype woman, as I like to say. I've done a bunch of content and workshops and speaking education around the very basics of money that no one taught us. So things like budgeting, making a debt plan, saving plan, things like that. I've done tons of budget coaching, again, lots of workshops and teaching and classes. And I just really love to get into the nitty gritty of helping folks embrace this thing called budgeting, which like word wise and vibe wise feels just sort of like this belch. Like you say budget and people are just like, well, no, thank you. So I'm really hyped on getting people to understand that a budget is simply just like structure for the way that you spend money, ideally aligned to the life that you want. And so that's one of my favorite things to do is help people get into the nitty gritty and get them excited about what a budget can help them say yes to, as opposed to that feeling of like restriction and no and sacrifice. There's a lot of freedom in a budget if you do it right.
I totally agree with you on all of that. Do you tend to see one type of budget more than another when it comes to what works for people?
I definitely like to tell folks that budgeting is definitely, it's not one size fits all. It's 100% what works for you. The best budget that works is the kind that you will stick to. So some folks really love, the cash envelope thing where they can feel the money going. Some people really love to use apps and spreadsheets. If you're like me, hello, neurodivergent girlies in the house, a lot of the times you'll get into a system for like 3 weeks and you're so psyched and then you fall off. And so it's actually, for me, what's more important is a system that feels good as opposed to the method. The method can change, but as long as you feel encouraged and enthusiastic and consistent about your method, then it's really, I love to encourage people to be flexible about it.
Absolutely. So on that note, we are going to start diving into our first budgeter's budget. And just a disclaimer for everyone watching this, all this is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and you should always seek help from a licensed financial professional for your individual situation. So let's set the scene. Our first budgeter is Padma, or we're calling her Padma. She is located in a big East Coast city, living in an urban area. She's making in the six figures in the 130K range, which is more than double what she was making last year. She says she's making 133K total with a 26K variable that hasn't been paid out yet, but will be. And that includes slightly over 100,000 base pay. And she also says she gets about $3,000 a year from her side gigs. She lives in a double income, no kids household with her partner and dog, and says, while our finances aren't entirely shared, we do both contribute and we split rent equitably, with him taking the lion's share currently because he makes more than me. All right. Initial thoughts. What do you think about Padma's situation?
I feel like there are Padmas surrounding me in San Francisco. There's like, I see myself in Padma as well. There's so many of us who are like, whoa, I'm living in a major city. I might jump careers and that means that my income jumps a lot. Double income, no kids, that dink life, feel it hard somewhere like San Francisco and this large East Coast city. And so I'm excited to dig into this because I feel like a lot of listeners' ears are probably perked up at this point.
Yeah, definitely. We asked everybody who is participating in this to tell us their biggest budget issue. For Padma, because of her income more than doubling from 60K to over 130K total compensation, This initially led to lifestyle inflation that she is still trying to stave off. For example, she doesn't think monthly facials are something she needs, but is still determining what lifestyle changes are worth it without balling out on every single thing so hard. Her biggest current money struggle is anxiety about what will be enough to support her loved one or a family eventually. She comes from a middle class immigrant household and would love to be able to support her mother, whose decision to remain married has been largely because she has always been a stay at home parent, has no work experience, and can't afford to support herself. Berna, I know you talk a lot about, you have this whole New Dimes platform you've been promoting lately, and you talk a lot about people who are in first gen or oldest daughter immigrant families who are getting control of their money for the first time. Is Padma's experience here something that resonates with you?
Oh my gosh, massively, massively. I feel like Padma has now officially become me and I am her. I am the head of community and culture at New Dimes, which is basically a platform for first gen breadwinners and wealth earners to figure stuff out, because a lot of the times when you come like Padma and myself from a immigrant household, things shake out very different for you financially. You are often having one foot in sort of American individualism, like billionaire worship culture, the other foot in, for a lot of us, collectivist cultures where the expectation is you are going to care for your parent. That is your obligation. That is something you've known since you were young. And so the whole growing up, like knowing you're going to be your parents' retirement plan really changes your finances. And what I find super interesting for Padma's situation is she's saying my income more than doubled this past year from 60K to 130K total comp. And that jump, that sort of like lifestyle leap, especially for first gen folks, is such a brain effort because you're likely earning more than your family ever has, your whole lineage ever has. And Padma talks about this like initial lifestyle inflation, which I'm hoping, first of all, I'm always going to go to the emotions first because I'm very much actually not a numbers person. I'm a water sign. And so I'm really hoping that Padma has given herself a little bit of grace around this sort of like, oh my gosh, this is more money than I've ever seen, my parents have ever seen. What do I do with it? To have like lean into a little bit of I might spend it a little more than before. I might have complicated feelings about spending it. She talks about guilt and she wants to indulge, but she doesn't want to feel shame. That is so, so common for first gen folks. And I'm excited to keep digging into this because we're going to get into both the math and the feelings.
Yes, definitely. An interesting thing for Padma is that her why is not necessarily related specifically to supporting her family. I can tell from reading her submission form that that's super important, but her why is actually, and by why we mean the big reason that you want to get good with money. Like, what's the driving factor behind you caring about money at all? And Padma's why is I would love to be able to relax and make good spending decisions when doing things like decorating my home or traveling and really enjoy the process without feeling stressed or guilty. What does that tell you about her money mindset up till this point?
It is so first gen. It is so alpha child. I don't know where she lies if she has siblings, but it's definitely giving alpha kid. It's giving that I have money now and I want to indulge and have fun, but I will always have this thing on my shoulder. And sometimes it feels like both a gift and a burden. In my life, and the way that I'm wanting to sort of move through Padma's kind of budget fix is one side being how do we take care of Padma and make sure that she not only feels like there is enough, because it is looking like budget wise, when you get into the numbers, there's like more or less enough. We've got a little bit of room. So, how do we make Padma feel grounded in that enoughness in terms of like emotions, but also in numbers that she can see and prove to herself? How do we fix the budget so that she has numbers around what is enough and kind of ranking according to like what her values are? And then that other side is the mom care side. I think it's looking like she's definitely going to be supporting mom in the future. She has a partner. They didn't talk about whether they're wanting to get married or not, or sharing parent care in the future. But I'm going to sort of assume that Padma is thinking about taking it on all on herself right now. That's a lot of pressure to be like, I'm living my best life. My ancestors are psyched for me, probably, and also I cannot leave my parent behind. I live in a culture where that is like it might not necessarily be like, oh yeah, like, care home. It is what it is. There might be a little bit more nuance to that. So there's going to be a lot to kind of dive into.
Yeah, absolutely. And last thing on Padma before we start looking at the budget she sent us is that her hobbies are expensive because they require taking classes, equipment, etc. And but she has had these hobbies for a long time, so she does make money off of them, which gets funneled back into pursuing them. I didn't dig into that, but to me that's giving Pilates instructor.
Yeah. Oh, good one.
If I when I read like equipment and everything. But you know, whatever it is, Padma, I'm sure it's really awesome. I'm going to pull up her budget that she sent over now. Interestingly, with Padma, because she seems, you know, she's making decent money. And when we look at her budget, she's making some good decisions here. It's very interesting that it's, we got a notes app screenshot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that to me tells me she's definitely thinking about all of these things, but maybe doesn't, because this, especially this level of income is so new, she maybe just hasn't put in place like a real system yet. So Padma's post-tax income monthly is just under $6,500 a month. She puts a little bit less than $1,000 monthly deductions into a Roth IRA, a 401k, and an HSA, as well as a fair amount of money into her employer's stock purchase plan, which she says is temporary. Her take-home pay after that is $5,176 a month. Her share of rent is $1,000. She puts $1,300 more into investments. So that is not including what she puts into her 401k, IRA, and those stock purchases through her company. She spends $400 a month on groceries, $350 a month on restaurants, $85 on the gym, $85 on recreation, $180 on transport, and she is a public transportation girly. We love to see it. Public transportation / Uber. $180 to me is pretty impressive for living in a big city and not having a car. $200 a month on hobbies. So that includes some of that hobby spending that she mentioned earlier. She earns money back from, so I'm assuming the $200 is like what she net spends. Mm-hmm. Personal care, $300, which includes monthly facials. Clothing, $0 to $500, which varies depending on how many clothes she's buying that month. $150 a month on gifts, $150 to $200 a month on donations, and various amounts to additional savings depending on what she's saving for. Okay, so
it's a mouthful.
I know. Thank you, Padma, for all the information. So, off the top of your head, what is this telling you? What are you seeing from this budget list from Padma?
So, like you were saying, I think it's really common for a lot of us to, especially when you go from maybe a tighter lifestyle, a certain kind of income, and you jump up, a lot of us move into that like, well, if there's space, then there's space. I'm going to kind of let my checkings account chill, have savings, but there might not be an actual system in place. So like you're saying, seeing a notes app, it's clear that Padma has a good idea of what those monthly expenses are. It's sounding like there's not a lot of kind of granular tracking, and Padma might not need that, but I do see this pretty common. Folks who experience lifestyle inflation, they're like, I'm gonna let it ride and see what happens, and if someone asks me, I will write it down. It's seeming pretty, I'm like, oh, rent $1,000, let me know. But I know Padma did say that their partner, it's like an equitable split with their partner when it comes to rent, which is great. I am seeing, it's interesting to me because one of the things that Padma had talked about was spending and feeling guilt, a little bit of anxiety around like, I want to feel good about the things that I want to spend on like decorating my home or things like that. I don't think that the sort of recreational spending is out of control here. I'm not seeing like, oh, whoa, like that's 30% of your, these things numbers wise will, I think, require a little bit of tweaking, but I'm definitely not seeing any kind of like, oh girl, we got to rehaul your thoughts around like discretionary spending, which then tells me that this anxiety and the guilt that she feels is definitely a little bit more perception based, which is again very, very common for first gen folks who come into money. We're spending, you might actually have the room, your spending habits might actually not be that wild, but the guilt follows you anyway, which is why I think getting down into, I think we talk about this a little bit further, but getting down into the granular of what her actual budget is, and then pinpointing the things that make her feel the most luxurious, feel the most secure, and focusing on them and knowing what numbers to hit so that she always knows what is enough for those things can help kind of quell that like first gen guilt anxiety of like, but it's never enough. And every dollar I spend is like a bad dollar if it's not on other people, as a very first gen brain. So we're going to hone that down.
Absolutely. What's interesting is I agree with you. Like, there's nothing calling out to me here that says irresponsible spending. Like, $350 a month on restaurants is extremely reasonable,
Better
especially
than me. Oh my.
yeah, a lot better than me.
Better.
So I think that's really impressive. One thing that is really interesting to me here is that we're not maxing out her IRA or a 401k. She is contributing to both of those things, but not if she's doing about a little bit more than $500 a month, that's going to be, $6,000 a year, which is well under the maximum for either a Roth or a 401k. But she also has those that stock purchase plan from her employer, and she also has those extra investments, which is really interesting, an interesting choice, because it seems like she's actually investing into a regular brokerage account more than she's investing into her 401k. I did follow up a little bit, but I didn't get a clear sense of what those investments are for. So do you think there's an instance where that makes sense for someone? Or do you think that maxing out a 401k or IRA or other retirement account should be, top of the list of priorities?
I think when it comes to folks who are planning both for themselves with like a new kind of wave of wealth that they've never experienced before and planning for future elder care, definitely it's that classic advice of like put that oxygen mask onto yourself before you care for others. And so I think for first gen folks, it's very important that, especially if you have an employer that's offering a generous stock purchase plan or 401k matching or anything like that, to max out on those investments. You cannot care for people if you are not cared for yourself. That's one thing that's really difficult for us, folks who come from immigrant households. We think that we need to bleed out so that other people can feel healthy and supported. And that's never going to be sustainable. It's not going to help anybody. And so I know we asked a little bit with Padma of just what these investments are, because it does seem like going harder in the paint with these kind of various investments versus the retirement. Not knowing exactly what those various investments are, I would say there's room to max out these, like her own retirement plan, so that she's set for the future. And then if there's still room inside of those various investments, maybe that's something that could be pivoted towards future mom care. Unless, again, we were talking a little bit about does the investment have to do with that side hustle? Can we find some creative solution for that so that she's maxed out on her personal future like retirement plan, and the rest of the investments are going towards essentially her dependent in the future, which is going to be a ongoing expense that will, the more she kind of front loads, the better she'll be in the future.
Absolutely. I do think that for 401k matching or 401k contributions and things like that, it can be really scary for people because the contribution limit this year is $23,500. And that's a lot to get used to taking out of your paycheck if you're not used to doing that. That's almost $2,000 a month coming out of those paychecks. So I do think that that is something people can work up to gradually. You don't have to just all of a sudden go, I want to say balls to the wall, but not like not say that.
Why not?
Just go completely
Ovaries
ham on
to the ceiling. I don't know.
yeah, just go completely ham on putting that much money towards your 401k all at once. I know I personally had to take a lot of steps to get to the place where I felt like I could max out mine. It's a really good goal, but it's not necessarily something you have to do immediately. As somebody who is going to be caring for her mother in the future, do you think there's some specific money things she should be focusing on that we haven't seen here, or not? It doesn't mean she's not doing them, but we just don't know about it.
Yep, definitely. I'm going to assume that Padma is like a lot of folks who are in, for example, New Dimes, that a lot of first gen folks who are just like, elder care is something, I see it coming on the horizon, and it's scary because I don't understand the shape of it. I don't know what the numbers are around it. I'm going to assume that Padma is someone who like knows it's coming but doesn't really know the math. And I think that's the most important thing to get down into, especially if Padma's not in a place where mom needs immediate care right now. Mom's not an immediate dependent. It's great to be able to front load that research so that when Padma's mom's needs become a little more urgent, she has a plan. So one of the sort of simple things to start thinking about is, what might her mother's monthly expenses be for her own care? That will open up more questions of like, does mom want to be in her own home? Does mom want to live by herself? Does mom want to live with family or in some sort of care center or community? What is going to be the plan for mom's health insurance? It looked like mom isn't able to work and can't support herself. And so What kind of benefits does she qualify for as she ages? And we'll get more into the specifics when we were talking about like sort of the budget breakdown. But we're thinking about mom's health and how Padma is going to figure out a plan for mom's health as well. And of course, do we have a trust and will locked down? Again, I'm assuming we're in a place where things aren't dire with mom's health or anything like that, but we're going to want to get all of that in place again before crisis hits so that we know how to protect Padma, protect mom, any of the wealth that they've built together, and pre-make those decisions so that crisis isn't even more crisisy in the future.
Absolutely. So now getting into our tiered recommendations, or what we would do in Padma's situation. First things first, Berna, you highlight that she needs to find the math first. So what does that mean?
I think if we're thinking of these two buckets, again, it's mom care and Padma care. Let's talk about Padma care first, because I really want to be able, especially for first gen folks who come from immigrant families, it is an exercise, it is a practice to think of yourself first. Very awkward, but necessary. I would ask her to find the math around these discretionary things that she enjoys. Now, it sounds like she knows enough about her budget to know, personal care is $300. It includes monthly facials. She's got hobbies. She's got recreation. I want her to stack rank the specific line items under those kind of variable things. So exactly how much does that facial cost a month? Exactly how much are we talking for classes and memberships? I would want her to put that all on a list and stack rank that according to satisfaction. What gives you the most joy? If you went a month with only the top 3 things on that list, how would that month feel? This is not so much like it's because you have to hone down the math and take out expenses. It's more like, let's focus on the most impactful, kind of highest value things for her emotionally, so that no matter if she can pay for the whole list that month or just the top 3, she still feels taken care of. For the mom care, I think this is where we got to do a couple of things no matter what kind of tiered recommendation Padma takes. I think she has to start the conversation with mom to find out what mom has and what mom expects. Has in terms of math, as in, do we know what mom has in terms of any kind of savings? Do we know what mom's health insurance situation is like? Do we know if mom has a trust or will? It sounds like mom is staying married. What would sort of be the implications around what is hers and not hers in that marriage? Obviously, again, as a daughter of immigrants, I'm not saying like skip on up to mom. It's going to be a super easy conversation. This is we can talk about the mild, medium, spicy versions of talking to mom, but you can even just begin the way that I like to do it as a daughter of immigrant. I like to begin with gossip, because no matter what culture you're from, we love to chismis. You might be like, mom, I heard, my friend Chelsea, her mom is in like a sticky situation because now mom wants to retire and she doesn't have her finances together. That's wild. And like, they didn't know what she had. And so they have no plan. What are your thoughts on that? How do you want things to end up for you in retirement? That could be a sort of softball. Like, what do you see, mom, your like next 10, 20 years of your life looking like in like the most comfortable version? And then we can use calculators to find out true costs of what that might look like once you know what mom has. The great thing is that every county has some sort of aging agency to help you figure out the costs and the benefits and support. There are literally numbers you can call and support you can get to be like, here's my mom's situation. Can you help me figure out her Medicare benefits that's available to her? Can you help me figure out just the calculation of elder care? And we can include some of these resources in the episode itself, but there's eldercare.acl.gov. That's a really good place to start. In looking at this, Holly, earlier I was looking at the website, and a lot of these websites have that very scary banner above it that's like, this is being reviewed in light of the current administration. So Padma, get on that website as long as we have the website. I'll say that.
There have been people doing the Lord's work and making older versions of like the CDC site pages that have gone down. Hopefully those resources aren't lost. I totally agree with everything you said there. I think for her mom's situation, it's really interesting because she said she would love to be able to support her because of her decision to stay married. So maybe that means hopefully her mother would be able to make the decision to not stay married in the future. I don't really know everything going on there, but I definitely agree with you. There's a lot of stuff going on that she needs to just have some real conversations with her mom. Yeah. So Berna had the great idea of ranking our suggestions for this series by mild, medium, and spicy. The mild tier is going to be something that is like lowest hanging fruit, easiest thing to start doing for this person. Medium, a slightly more advanced or more emotionally stimulating change to a budget. And then spicy being like you want to go all in, you want to make these huge changes to really maximize your budget and maximize, reaching that why in the long term. So for mild, I really just decided for Padma, just make a budget would be a really good place to start. I think, as we said, she definitely is making some good choices. She has a handle on, how much money she has and where it's going, but there are a lot of variables that she listed. And like you said, we don't really know the order of operations when it comes to what's the most important. She did highlight how important her hobbies are, so I guess that would probably be one of the biggest priority spending. But I dropped everything into a basic budget template with her take-home pay as $6,478 a month. So putting all of this into her budget means that she has $690 a month left over, and that is not taking into account, what she is variably saving for vacations and stuff like that. And when I added in that $250 a month for taking into account her side gig money, that gives us $940 extra to work with. She said she saved anywhere from $650 to $1,400 a month based on if she's traveling, if she's spending more on clothes, I guess, or something. I did actually just go ahead and put the $500 like maximum range she said she spent on clothes into this budget. Mm-hmm. So, some months, if she's saving $1,400 a month, that could have been that she's not spending any money on clothes that month. So I'm not getting the sense that Padma's putting herself in credit card debt or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But I think one reason I would suggest putting everything into an actual budget spreadsheet is to just assign every dollar a job and actually see what's going where. Having those ranges in place of what you're spending a month means that maybe you don't have a total handle on every place that your dollars are going, which is totally fine. And especially if you're living under your means, which it seems like Padma's doing. But I definitely think getting a bird's eye view picture of what the budget is actually looking like is really helpful. What do you think, Berna?
Yeah, definitely. I think the practice of plugging your numbers into a spreadsheet, knowing that that spreadsheet will be the same tomorrow. It's not like movable or deletable the way that a notes app could be. That can get a little effy in terms of kind of formatting. I might just be talking from like type A brain, but it is really nice to just get the numbers on it. I think in the mild sense, she does not need to be like tracking every single day and like being really hard on herself, but to try to assign every dollar a job and like the budget is sort of the job sheet, even just starting there is fantastic. Something I would also add that's definitely mild and could feel good is maybe setting some sort of time every other week or once a month to be able to look at this budget, look at the numbers. We're not saying like get in there and punish yourself, but look at them and start a budget journal. So I would love for Padma to, actually, I would love it if it was every 2 weeks or every time she got a paycheck, but just sit and look at this budget, and maybe there's a different part of the spreadsheet or a physical journal that she loves and feels good, where she just writes about how she feels about her money while looking at her budget. Maybe she'll end up looking at some of the spending, and she can ask herself, like, how do I feel about my spending the last 2 weeks? What felt the most like delicious to spend on? What do I feel the guiltiest about? What's still giving me anxiety? I think doing that for a couple of months or a couple of rounds, what's wonderful is you can look back and see how your emotions connect with your spending. Maybe there is some sort of higher expense month and Padma's like, I had to ball out actually on clothes because I'm going on a trip or I have a work thing. Here's how I feel about it. Or maybe it's some sort of financial thing coincides with an emotional thing. It's just amazing to look back at your emotional journey while also looking at how the numbers change. And that could really inform, like we were saying, the sort of stack ranking on what actually is the most satisfying to me. How do I react when things happen to myself in the month? What are things that I didn't realize I wasn't putting aside money for, or I wish I did? And this could be, again, low key, because journaling, there's no wrong answers. She could just yap as much as she wants into her preferred receptacle. And that could feel really good. And then on the mild set for mom care, I would say, of course, it's not necessarily a mild thing, but we said to sort of set the foundations of like start to do that math and start the little beginnings of conversations with mom, but it's definitely what you need to begin. And I think on the mild set, once you've talked to mom, a little bit got an idea of what she's working with, you got an idea of what expenses might look like in the future once slash when mom becomes a true dependent. One mild thing that Padma can do is open a high yield savings account to start putting away for future caregiving expenses. High yield savings accounts are free to open, they're all over the place, and she could be putting any amount towards whatever those expenses might be. Of course, in doing your elder care calculations, you'll also be able to see, like, all right, when she becomes my dependent, I need X amount per month. And maybe you want some sort of like 3 or 6 month like starter nest egg for when like real mom care truly happens. And so having that goal around your high yield savings account, knowing what number you're trying to hit and putting away little by little. I love how you pointed out, Holly, that there is this sort of side gig expenses, and we could talk about this a little more throughout, but is there a way that you can think of your side gig or think of your kind of side investments as mom fund? You know, like maybe that $250 just goes directly to mom fund. Maybe everything you do side gig wise is mom care. I like to sort of dissect my brain in that way. So it's not too much like fractionizing the big paycheck. If you're lucky enough and you're resourced enough to have a side gig, I think it gives you a little bit extra juice to be that the side gig is for this. It's for mom care. It's for investing or anything like that. I also feel like foundational, but good to start. Look into estate and legal planning so you can figure out your mom's will, power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and things like that. Again, mild in terms of I need you to do it soon, not necessarily mild in terms of easy, but there are services I feel like out there that kind of package estate and trust and will things for folks and make this a little bit more digitized, a little bit more efficient for us.
Yeah, and that's a good reminder for my husband and myself because we've been meaning to do that for quite a long time and we
Oh
keep
yeah.
putting it off. So definitely, I think that's important for anybody to do, and I don't recommend putting it off the way that we have. So definitely
Oh
something to
yeah.
do.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on to our medium tier. I personally think Padma should think about setting up some sinking funds to get her savings more clearly planned out. What do you think?
I think sinking funds would be fantastic, especially because we have discretionary funds. And I'm imagining that this is the discretionary stuff that kind of goes up and down, the maybe the travel savings, the clothing, the hobbies. That is probably the thing that's giving her the most anxiety because again, it's that first gen like I'd like to ball out on myself, but how much? Oh my God. A sinking fund is something that it's essentially like a savings method. It's an account or like a bucket that you open up and you put money in there for things that aren't necessarily every month expenses, but at least creates a fund for when I need that. People have sinking funds for car repairs or like house repairs. People also can have sinking funds for I need to ball out on clothes or I need to ball out on like I'm having a really rough month and I need more than a facial. I need a spa weekend. You know, you can make a self-care sinking fund, but you treat it like a bill. You treat it like a line item in your budget so that you're consistently giving some sort of like minimum amount to it. So that in the future, when you're like, I need more than the minimum amount, it's already there for you. I think it's a really brilliant idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally am really big on sinking funds for a lot of things. I use them for vacations specifically. I know that Padma is saving different amounts every month depending on, I guess, what trip she has coming up. I think it's a lot easier to save that way and instead of saving ad hoc for individual vacations and stuff like that.
I think when we're thinking about mom care, you can definitely open, it's kind of what we're talking about with the high yield savings account in the mild situation, a sinking fund for mom care. I'm wondering if there are any mom care, parent care expenses that are coming up for her right now. And that would be great to have a sinking fund where maybe it's every few months she has to do something for her mom, but it's not every single month. Just kind of getting used to that, like including your mom in your budget as part of your everyday life and your sort of like monthly line items. I would say the medium version of that would be to open a brokerage account for mom care savings, something that can actually grow. We don't know how old mom is or how far out we are in terms of like when we're going to really need to take care of her from month to month. So I would say if it's past 3 or 5 years from now, it would be great to invest that money. If you're not going to touch it necessarily for like a few years until a few years off. You can also look into long-term care insurance. I know this tends to be pretty pricey, but this is basically a kind of insurance where you buy into it now and then you're able to take from that plan to use things like long-term care. It might be housing, it might be healthcare costs and things like that. That could be a little spicier on the cost side for sure, but it's important to look into now and consider, is that something that you can build into your budget, or something that you can build your income up to, or maybe your side hustle income up to specifically buy into long-term care insurance now so you're covered in the future.
All right, moving on to our last spicy tier in terms of budget fixing. I think we both agreed here that one spicy thing we would do if we were in Padma's shoes is focus on maxing out those retirement contributions. One thing I think is really interesting with Padma is that her why was about being able to enjoy life and spend without having to stress or worry about it. How do you think maxing out her retirement contributions would help her achieve that goal?
I would say leaning into that, the maxing out the retirement, it can feel the scariest and the spiciest, like you said, because then if you're getting a breakdown of that paycheck, you're like, look at all that cash going to future Padma. And I have anxieties now. And it'd be really nice to not be squirreling that away so I could have it right now. But I like to, this could get a little silly, but I get into this in my book, that when we're thinking about retirement savings and we're doing things like maxing out our contributions, I like to make sure I'm thinking about my future retired self as an actual person. So I am Berna now. My full name is Bernadette. I am not Bernadette now. Bernadette is my retired self. And so when I thought about when I had that regular W-2 job, I was like, okay, it hurts to look at my paycheck and be like, oh, that money, ow, ow. But I'm like, that's not for me. That's for Bernadette. That's so Bernadette can make sick decisions. That's so Bernadette can feel freedom in her own retirement. That's so Bernadette knows that she's covered if she's still covering mom. You know, I'm like, that is for my future self. And it gives, I'm like, knowing that this is all feeding into the cycle of me, it like levels out my anxiety a little bit more. And it makes me, it kind of reaffirms that like, my mask first before I help other people. Because if Bernadette is not good, Bernadette cannot care for anybody. And mom can't be helped, certainly, if Bernadette is struggling. So, Padma, think of who future Padma is, name her, give her a persona. What's the like strange kind of quirky like hobby she's going to get into in her retired life, and how like, you know, what's important to her in the future? Why do you want to support her? And it might unlock a little bit of that anxiety of turning up the gas on all those retirement contributions.
Absolutely. I also want to point out that there's one big benefit that Padma has that is not the case for everybody that she absolutely needs to plan for. And that is she has variable compensation that she's going to be paid out. And she says it's about $26,000, which, you know, after taxes will be looking more like, I don't know, 15, 16, depending on where she lives, but still a very sizable chunk. I personally would make some very big plans for this. I think, you know, at TFD, we usually advocate for the 10% rule or the 90% rule, depending on how you want to look at it. But using 10% on something fun for yourself. So like that could even be, I mean, with that amount of money, you could even have that 10% could go towards a plane ticket to Europe or something. Totally. And then 90% to long-term big goals. Depending on how if your employer 401k is set up, it may or may not be an option to use that variable compensation as a 401k contribution. It is actually the way that our payroll is set up at TFD. I can put variable compensation towards my 401k, but like my husband at his company, like that is not an option. It has to come out of his like regular paycheck. So look into that. But definitely any of the stuff we talked about here can definitely be you can definitely take into account that big paycheck you're going to have coming for any of this. Do you have any specific advice for when people get windfalls like that?
Absolutely. So I think this is why it's so important to stack rank not just your like desires and discretionary spending, but also stack rank your goals and your dreams, right? Like what are the things, and this is where we can use our friend anxiety and she could be helpful as opposed to harmful. What are the things that do give you the most anxiety and jitters when you think about not enoughness? And so then when you have a windfall, there's variable compensation, maybe you get some sort of bonus or you get a tax refund, you already have sort of a pyramid of needs of where that money should fall. I love that you bring up that sort of 90-10 split, because when you get a windfall like this, it doesn't need to mean, you know, all that money then goes into priority number one and F the rest. It could be that you divide it equally or equitably amongst like your top three worries. But as long as you're giving something to each, and you're giving in the order of what freaks you out the most, that really, for me, helps my anxiety a lot.
Lastly, in our spicy category, we've been talking about mom care in each of these tiers. So, what would be your suggestions for Padma planning for her mom at the spiciest level?
For sure. So it's funny because the spice can be a little mixed. I do think since long-term care insurance can get expensive, that could be spicy in and of itself. You might look at the number and be like, oh, it doesn't get spicier than that. Where am I going to get that income? But I also think on the level of first gen daughter of immigrant hard mode for a lot of us would be I become the full time caregiver. And so, even just as a mental exercise for yourself, Padma, I would think, what are the caregiving costs around becoming a full time caregiver? How am I going to replace my income and still support myself if I do decide to be my mom's full time caregiver, or if I decide that mom is going to live with me or my partner in the future? And there's certain things attached to that. How am I going to make sure that I'm still financially okay while being the one that is taking care of and fully funding my mom's life? Part of this spiciness, you could either see this as spicy or you could see this as foundational. I think it's foundational. If you see that you're going to be with your partner, that's like it's a long-term situation, open up the conversation about that now. I think a lot of us who are in our sort of like mid 30s ish and we're in semi-serious situations, it's important to be like, well, what does care look like for you in the future? What does like advanced care look like for you in the future? Am I going to be part of a household that's taking care of your parents, my parents? What's that going to look like? That is a definitely could be a spicier conversation, but I think it's important to sort of look on the spicy side. It's like, if I'm choosing the most DIY path, if I'm choosing the thing that's the most like, I'm going to have to get into the weeds and figure this out myself, what are the actual costs around that? How do I replace my income? I think that could be a very spicy thing for Padma to do.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion of Padma's budget. Would you like to end on any words of wisdom for Padma?
For sure. I think we just asked Padma to do a lot of emotional unpacking and also potentially scary looking math. It's a lot of future planning. It's a lot of where am I going to get those numbers from? Where am I going to, who's going to hold all these variable math in my head? I think the most important thing overall, before, during, after all of this, is find support from other folks who are doing the same thing. That's not easy to find other folks who are either, they could be first gen, they could be people who are caretaking, but I would say start to have conversations like wider in your circles, people in your friend group, your peer group, in your area. I guarantee these are questions that people very close to you are asking themselves. And a lot of the times we cut ourselves off from that community support because we're like, this is something I got to figure out myself. It's weird to talk about money. Padma, I need you to have some like first gen caretaking friends so that you can crowdsource a lot of this information and both emotionally, mathematically, financially hold each other through all these big questions, because it's a lot. And I really don't want you to do this alone.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Berna. This was so much fun. I'm really excited for the rest of our episodes. Where can people find you?
Awesome. This is so delightful and very satisfying. I would stack rank this high on my list of things that are satisfying for me today, because it's just like, it's such a juicy thing to get into. You can find me at Hey Berna on all the things. Hey Berna on Instagram is where I hang out and I lurk the most. I'm also on TikTok, and heyberna.com for all the professional goodness.
See you guys all next time on The Budget Fix here on TFD. Bye.